Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Bhragan. He's currently working at AECOM. I got to discover him through his amazing newsletter called Last Week in Contact. If you haven't checked it out or haven't subscribed, do it right now before we go into the interview. But he has done some amazing research and can't wait to deep dive more about his work, his journey, and everything. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Meyer. Thanks for having me. And I think I should also plug that you have a great AI and AEC newsletter, which is exactly how I found you as well. So that's great as well. So you should subscribe if you haven't subscribed already as well.
I see. Thanks. So, Bragan, for people who don't know you, right out of college to till this date, what would
Mhm.
be three highlights of your career?
Yeah, that's a different way to put it. So definitely interesting question. I think, yeah, three highlights post college. Number one would be so before being a civil engineer for a period of time, I was working as like a freelance low code developer or software developer. So in bubble.io. And probably one of my most rewarding projects doing that was an education project where we got more people to learn and understand how to use Bubble. So it was really cool because it gave people the opportunity to do extra work if they needed, or even work full time as a Bubble developer. And that was a program I went through myself, which allowed me to work for myself for a period of time. And then getting the other side of building the education program was really rewarding because I got the feedback from people being like, hey, like this helped me to quit my job. And I was like, oh, that's like
Nice.
pretty awesome. So that was definitely like one of the highlights. I think currently at AECOM, one of my like current roles is I'm on. Can't speak to it too broadly, just because it's a government role. But I was on secondment to an innovation team in a transport project here, so level crossing removal, and that's really cool because going from a place of always being interested in kind of construction tech to actually seeing how that's implemented, not only from the perspective of new solutions, but everything around it. So how do you pilot it, but also how do you train and uplift capability internal in the organization to doing that? So that's been a really cool opportunity. And then I guess I have to plug the newsletter. So that's been pretty fun in terms of, yeah, it's something I've been interested in. I always was wondering if anyone else was interested in. So writing that newsletter has been cool in the sense of finding other people like yourself and other people who I've chatted to who are also interested in what feels like a weird and obscure thing, but is actually much larger and much more interesting than I realized.
Amazing. And how, for people listening, how would one develop skills for the role and the work you do? Because it's not right out of what they teach at school. So,
Yeah, no, that's a really good point because something that came up in one of the discussions I had with, I guess, like one of the bosses there was, yeah, they find it quite difficult often to find people for these roles because it's very different to core engineering work. So core engineering work, you have a process, you have a methodology, you know exactly what you're going to do and kind of how you need to get through that process. Whereas a lot of the work that we do is unclear in terms of scope and unclear in terms of outcome. And we're really kind of trying to figure that out. And for me, what helped in so many ways was the newsletter of going, hey, I know that there's a need for this newsletter just primarily for myself, but then what's my target customer profile? What's my goal? What's my outcome? Really trying to figure that out. And it's just really a rapid iterating learning process. And that's the same thing in this role of, hey, we don't know what innovation looks like. We don't know what ROI is, but we know that there's these key critical pain points. How can we solve them? What can we do to get there? And yeah, it's really that design thinking methodology that we try to apply.
it's quite interesting, and it's rare to have people with this kind of roles and background. And so, can you share a bit about how does a week in your life look like?
Yeah. I guess on a work level, so from an AECOM perspective, on one side I work in the payments and aviation team. So when I'm doing payment and aviation work, that's pavement design work or aviation will be out on site at Melbourne Airport. So either supervising work or doing construction support if that's our role. And then we have the innovation role. So yeah, I can't speak too broadly just because it's government, but level crossing removal project is, I think it's about 100. There's over 100 level crossings being replaced across Victoria, my state, And basically, it's just trying to find innovations that we could repeat. So if we're doing this 100 times or over 100 times, 110 times, can we do anything to improve this process and create savings for the taxpayer? And there's so many different ways to cut that pie, and it's quite interesting and fun because I think up to until this point, engineering is very, oh, like you're on a project and you're trying to figure it out. But here it's, oh, let's define our own projects. Let's figure out what the problem is. Let's make that pitch. Let's build that deck to get approval from like the higher ups, and then get a bit of funding and a bit of support to start delivering and bring those outcomes ourselves. So that's been, yeah, pretty exciting and pretty creative as well.
Nice. I want to know your definition of innovation in construction tech, because it it's an arguable term where like some things are like borrowed technology from other fields and adopting in fields and in our field and could be called innovation. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really good question because it's difficult to define, and the way that you define it is very unique to the organization that you're working for. So I think a one good way of defining it is the organization has strategic goals, and innovation is a way of accelerating achieving those strategic goals. The way I really think about innovation is, how can I save time, or how can I make us do more with less? So with the same amount, can we do more, or can we do the same amount with less people? And even, as simple as the newsletter, I think of as innovation from information standpoint. All right, how can I save you time by, you only have to read a 10-minute newsletter, and that keeps you, more information so that you can make better decisions. So I think innovation is anything that, yeah, helps me save time and helps me to do more with less.
Amazing. Uh, and for people who might not have read your newsletter, what can you give a high level overview of what kind of content it is and how can people benefit from it?
Yeah. So the way I think about the newsletter, it's called Last Week in Contact, and it's just a summary of everything related to the construction technology ecosystem. So from startup fundings and a bit of information around that, really specifically diving into what that startup is doing, because sometimes it isn't always clear. And then the policy and regulatory mix, but also national level project priorities. And the reason why that's important is, I really think of the ideal customer profile as a director of technology or some kind of construction executive, where they're looking at, hey, we need to make strategic decisions about the future. We know technology is really important, but we don't have time to stay abreast of the news. So we're giving them information of, hey, these are the new innovations. This is what the US government, the China government, or the European, the EU, other governments are doing to really progress change within their jurisdiction. So that could be building code changes, that could be tax credits, that could be subsidies, or even tariffs on various materials around the world. So understanding how the regulatory mix is influencing technology, and then how technological change is occurring, is really important to make strategic decisions of how to allocate capital in the future. So that's the target customer profile. And then I think downstream of that, investors, startup founders, anyone in the industry, hopefully, can find value from it.
I see. Looks like it's breaking a bit in between, but
Just a slight lag. Yeah.
apologize for that. Yeah,
That's
yeah. So yeah, like it just made me curious. It would be great to have like a in-person workshop or a big day event where like all the knowledge you have accumulated can be distilled down in like uh forms where all these people are also in the same space and
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely be pretty cool. It's something that was just come up before of like, hey, like events would be really cool. But then at the same time, I think for me personally, I've never been a big conference person. So if I was, or if there were other people interested in that, it's like, how can we do that in a way that's different? So because conferences to me is just more about, all right, let's get all the same people in the room and have those conversations. The panels and the discussions, sometimes you may not say everything on your mind just from, oh, hey, we can't share this information. So how do we actually provide value to people? Give them workshops? Yeah, I think there's many ways to cut that pie, but I'm not sure what that looks like.
mm, I see. Any stories of feedback you got from your newsletter and like how is the community responding to it?
Yeah, it's that's kind of been the nicest thing about the newsletter of yeah, people are pretty supportive, and I think it's just because construction text feels pretty small, like yourself would be pretty aware of. There aren't many of us who are very interested or passionate about it, or if we are, we're pretty much the only one in our organization. So everyone's been pretty supportive. I get yeah, pretty semi-regular just LinkedIn messages or responses to the newsletter saying, "Hey, I love it, would love to chat," or so I get about like, yeah, 3 to 5 calls just a week from random people on the internet, which is pretty cool. And yeah, because the industry is so big, like even within my organization, how many of us, really are interested or supportive of technology? Now I'm in an innovation team, it's very different. But before that, it'd be just me. So yeah, it does feel pretty lonely in that way. And I think all of us are just going, hey, I want to talk to someone else who really cares passionately about this problem.
Nice. And what's next step for Last Week in Contact?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've been thinking about. And I think right now I have, that weekly email. Some of the other content that's been coming around it has been really thinking about how do we build effective innovation programs. So I think that's really difficult. We saw, I think it was back in 2016, Bechtel and companies like those big companies started to start offices of innovations, but then they've kind of petered out. And ROI is really difficult to calculate for innovation. Comes down to what you said before, what does innovation mean? And I think that there is best practices, but our industry is so fragmented, it's siloed. And we're starting to see the great innovation consultants like Nate Fuller or Aaron Khan or Prakash as well. They've created their own independent practices, so they have an incentive to share this knowledge. And I'm hoping that a couple of them they've written for me as well. Is they share that knowledge through this newsletter, because I think we need industry leading best practice on
Mm.
actually how do we start these programs, because the big guys and the big corporates have the funding, but the mid tiers or the mid market need these programs just as much as the big guys, but they don't have the funding available to actually invest in it. So how can we shorten that process and make them, start with a running start?
Like I love the approach, like SMB, construction firms, innovation at accessibility at a scale, because resources are also a big constraint for them.
Yeah, and they don't usually have the margins or that extra investment to make that change, but they have the exact same problems that a big firm like AECOM has.
Yes. So how would you approach uh, ensuring that adoption is at scale? Is it uh, a format of just educational awareness that okay, these are the things you could adopt in your practices, or it requires a different approach?
Look, I can't say it too specifically just because I haven't, rolled out an entire program effectively. But what I have noticed is, and many, startup founders would find this, you gain adoption on a project by project basis, but it's really difficult to scale beyond that often. So at some point you have to talk to head office, and head office is really good at scaling things out. But even then, adoption is hard because there's education, training, and rethinking workflows. And workflows is difficult because workflows can be pretty individualized throughout the company or even throughout a project. So you got to think about that. And I think one of the strongest things about our industry is word of mouth and word of mouth referrals. So any way you can think of expediting that through an organization is really valuable. And I know some of the most simple innovations is simply just going, hey, this person in this one team did something that saved them heaps of time. Let's showcase that. Let's have a lunch and learn session with this person, just showing exactly what they did and how you could copy it in your projects. And as simple as that, just information sharing often makes a big difference. And I think, the newsletters, that was the thinking with the newsletter of, hey, we have so many problems, but um, siloed information, even inside an organization, is one of the biggest problems, because we could have the best innovation. If no one knows about it, what's the point? And I think we need to figure that out even inside organizations of, hey, how do we create an innovation community internally? How do we create innovation content or innovation newsletters. And it is hard because you start to compete with other like sustainability and other newsletters that do exist, but it is really important to identify the people who are passionate and then provide them the means and education to implement it in their own projects. And then they will start spreading it out to other people in their teams.
Mm, I see. Have you felt this problem like in the AEC community in general? Like a lot of people are sitting on data, and the challenge is okay, it's unstructured data, and it's very fragmented across different formats and stuff. So they are sitting on IP, but also they don't know how to leverage the IP. What's the way?
Yeah.
So, any thoughts on that opportunity?
Yeah. I think a lot of people kind of don't like AI wrappers for various reasons, but everyone goes, hey, I can build that myself. But when you think about a mid market firm, an AI wrapper sometimes still takes a bit of development effort and work and thinking to actually build it effectively because you still need that UX. And I still think that AI wrappers could work really effectively for the mid market. And what you need to do is you just need to make sure that it's private and secure and it just works only on that specific firm's data and trains only on their data and they have their own instance of it. So if I'm a mid market firm, I don't have the capability to have a software development team in house or even a person in house. And I don't have the ability to even build this wrapper. So why don't I just take this firm that is providing these wrappers and I can upload all my messy data into it and then start to get really interesting outputs out of it. So like bidding proposals is a really great example that I've seen multiple times across organization. Everyone talks about it. So even if it is a simple AI wrapper, but if you can get a closed instance of it, you don't need to sell to the big guys, and you could build that as a not as a startup but as a small 3 or 4 person team pretty effectively. So I think there's still opportunity. It's just, you know having that awareness, probably engaging with the conversation effectively, really highlighting what the value add you're providing is, understanding your ideal customer profile, but then also giving really effective training and onboarding, because those are all things that you need if you build a wrapper in house that you're not going to have the funding available to do so.
I see. I think this is a golden nugget. So the way a startup founder could approach is we're gonna make a AI personalized to your data for SMBs, and it's gonna understand all your past bids, and this AI will help you do future bid, and the distribution will okay do some pilots, validate the problem and do it at scale. And this wrapper doesn't require a big team, so the cost to build the pilot is also very low.
Yeah, and you should always think about deploying the infrastructure on, on their servers, because that's really at
Mm,
the end of the day, everyone cares about
yeah,
IP data security. As long as I as a startup founder don't have the IP, that's fine. Whether that idea is $1 billion startup is another thing. You might not get venture funding because it's just a wrapper, but it is very much a small, SMB. You could make millions of dollars of revenue selling to the mid market doing that.
interesting. uh any other like idea are low hanging adoption for SMBs, like doesn't require a lot of efforts to develop or integrate?
Yeah, I mean, given that I do a lot of training and capability uplift, that's what comes to mind of
Yeah.
sharing ideas that work. And as simple as back office ideas of, hey, we don't have standardized processes across our projects. Because as a civil engineer, especially if you're on a construction site, you get thrown in the deep end. And your foundation of knowledge is usually based on the first project that you are placed on, which may not be actually best or like the best type of way to deliver. Because just say if I work on 10 projects, even if it's in the same company, often those 10 projects are run in a very different way. And my first project might be really digitally innovative, but my last project might be using some old school system that existed 20 years ago. So it's really important to make sure that that foundation boilerplate template that we start a new project on continues to be improved and people understand uh, how that operation works. So you need some kind of continuous training and learning and development in a really easy manner. And at AECOM, we'll have lunch and learns. That's pretty standard across most organizations. But at a mid-market firm or a smaller firm, it isn't as common. But if you can just do it over lunch or something like that, it can be really valuable because those conversations are our best practice, ones that an engineer will carry throughout their career. So if they've been pegged or anchored at a project that really wasn't that great, they're going to carry those learnings. So we need to go, hey, these are the lessons learned. These are the best things. And it sounds really simple, and we always talk about, hey, this great new technology, but we need to make sure that we're doing those simple things before we even implement these big tech fixes.
Got it. And one thing our industry is being known for is friction to adoption, new tech. From your experience, are there any strategies that work, didn't work for encouraging finding champions or whatnot?
I think at the end of the day, your solution just needs to solve a critical pain point that people are willing to pay for. And when you really think about it, the difference between civil engineers versus, I guess, software developers is, given the nature of our industry, we're very risk averse. So we only want to use a solution, one, if we know it's safe to do so, and then two, we don't have that much time and we're not paid as much as a software developer to go around and tinker. So it needs to provide me value today, and I need to know exactly what kind of value. I need that click in my brain to go, that's why I should learn this solution. That's how it's going to help me today. And if I have that click in my brain, I will definitely use that solution. And a really good example was I was talking to another innovation consultant, and when I was talking to them, they said, "Yeah, if your NPS isn't over 80%, so if you when you ask a question on a scale of 1 to 10, how willing are you to recommend the solution? If it's not above 8, your solution will not get adoption." And at the end of the day, as a startup, your and primary goal is to solve for a pain point. And as much as we say, hey, we're averse to technology, truthfully, the solution has to solve for a pain point. And a lot of solutions don't necessarily solve for pain points. Or, I'll look at the startup website when I'm writing my newsletter and I go, I don't know what this is solving for.
Mm,
And at the end of the day, it's just the basics. Make sure you're solving for a pain point and make sure that you can communicate that clearly to the engineer. So they go, oh, I know this is a no-brainer for me to use. Like, one great example is I walk around, take a photo, then I circle on my drawings, oh, hey, here's where a defect is. There's apps out there that allow me to take a photo, automatically links it to the markup back on my screen, and I can write a note on the defect. Absolute no-brainer. You explain that to me in 2 seconds, I understand it. So it's really going, what's the pain point? Who's my target customer? How can I really show them the value in a really quick way? And that's how you get adoption.
got it. And you have written so many articles covering various startups in solving various problems. What are some areas where you find more saturation of solutions, and what are some areas where there's more
Mm.
opportunity?
Yeah, it's always hard to say. I think there's a lot of project. This is just off the top of my head, so I can't speak to the data, but I always see, I guess, project management solution or reality capture solutions, because they were some of the first. It felt like obvious, or I mean, Holo Builder was one of the first. So everyone saw them working and everyone jumped on that train. So I see a lot of solutions out there. A place where I don't see solutions, which it might be, there might be a good reason why, and I've discussed it before, is in the insurance side, or sometimes in some of the financial and the fintech side. There was this really good field study by Alpaca VC on fintech as it relates to construction and how it will start to be used in the industry. They don't actually have that on their website anymore. So you got to use archive or web archive to access it. And it really broke down the opportunity in insurance tech and fintech and bringing those solutions to bear. And I think one of the reasons, there are a lot of solutions in that space now, but one of the reasons that it needs to work is for payment approvals. You need a lot of other technology to start automating the financial parts of it, of like, hey, like, here's the model oh, now this is 80% of the model. Now we can trigger a payment automatically, because a lot of those processes are manually. But to automate it, you might need reality capture. You might need to match it to the BIM model. And for that, you need people to actually start using BIM. So there's a lot of technology that needs to happen for those fintech or insurance tech solutions, it feels like. And I think those are going to be really interesting in the future.
Got it. Let's say I want to make Bhragan GPT.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a prompt that would understand the research process and evaluating whether I should list on my newsletter or not?
Yeah, I read a lot of emails is the way, but the what I really think about is, can this solution be used on site or by a AEC professional tomorrow? So if I read the solution, even if it's in manufacturing tech or military tech or logistics tech, I go, if I had that on my construction site, if I had that in my design, would that save me time? And if the answer is yes, it'll be included. So there's a lot around logistics tech, which is just as simple as tracking every single trailer and knowing what material or what is inside that trailer. That would be incredibly useful for a site engineer so that they can plan and schedule their works. So I really think about it. All right, if I was on a construction site, if I'm in the office doing design, what would actually help me to save time, and what solution would I love to have?
God. And what are the sources? Because you cover a very wide spectrum of uh, things in your newsletter, and it's hard to keep up. So how do you stay updated?
Yeah, it's a lot of Google alerts, and it's a lot of subscribing to, like, any email I see, I'll subscribe to it if I go, ah, this is like relevant or this is valuable. Having said that, like, I have stripped it down, not stripped it down, but there are certain emails that I go, oh, these are like really great, or certain creators who'll post and I'll be like, oh, they're really great to follow and understand. But yeah, a lot of Google alerts and a lot of emails, and it's just, I've done it for over a year now, so it started at like 200 emails a week. Now it's like up to over 600. So it just starts compounding because I've just subscribed to so many.
Yeah, that's a lot of email. Yeah, I think like I've been also testing Google Alert for in
Mm.
AI interior design. It's like it's not so well talked way of keeping up to date with the trends and finding news which you won't find on your like Twitter or LinkedIn feed. So
Yeah, and I think it's a statement of what you see more generally, not even in construction, but generally across the ecosystem. You're seeing the rise of curation because, hey, like, we have information abundance, even with AI. How do we find information that I know is highly important or valuable? And that comes down to trust with the person who's curating. So if you trust me, I'm curating this piece of information, and this is why it's in there.
mm, I see. What according to you is a tech native construction firm? Like how does it operate and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation of, can the incumbents really build the future? Because they are so encumbered by what has happened in the past. And it feels like if you just built a new construction company today from scratch with the best in class processes and the best in class technology, you would win and dominate the market. And I don't know if this story is true, but I heard a story about DPR when it was founded. It grew very quickly to be one of the biggest organizations. And what they did was exactly that philosophy. The only problem is they've been around for so long that they're now encumbered by their old processes. So I think there's two problems of, if you built a new company today and you built it with the best processes, that's great. But how do you continue the learning cycle so that in the future it actually continues to grow and continues to become better? And I don't think anyone solved that. I think what is really interesting and what a technology enabled contractor might look like is quite simply a tech firm or a startup right now going, hey, we can't actually go to market effectively and people aren't seeing the value in our solution. Let's buy a contractor, or let's buy a design firm to rubber stamp our designs or to start using our processes to prove it. And I, again, could be mistaken on this, but I think it's O11H, the fundamental company, that they had a new construction methodology, and then they had a construction firm to prove it because
Mm,
it's very risky. New methodology, no one wants to try it. Can it work? And they had this construction firm, and they started to deliver projects to go, hey, this actually really works. And then I think now they want to close their construction company and just be like, hey, now everyone can start using this methodology or using this solution. That could be a strong abridgment of actually what happened, but I know there was this talk of them being a startup within a startup, but that is one way. If you do build out a new and innovative construction methodology, there's a lot of training and a lot of upskilling required. And no one wants to try a new process because it brings risk. And it's really difficult because you have to assign that risk somewhere. So sometimes the best way to go to market is to actually self-perform and deliver, learn all the hard lessons, and then provide it to your clients when you either close your construction shop if you want to sell that way, or maybe you go, hey, I just want to be a tech-enabled contractor. But then the margins are pretty fixed at that 10 to 15% range. So you're not really going to get startup funding for that potentially.
mm, interesting. I like how you also evaluate an idea whether this will get funding or not. It's a different muscle. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, most construction solutions or a lot of construction solutions probably won't, like, they don't necessarily get funding because there's a couple of things that need to go into it. I have it written down somewhere, so I can't remember off the top of my head. But one question is, how big is the addressable market, which in construction almost always feels like it's big enough. But more than that, it's also, can that business model scale? Can that, if we pour cash or if we pour money, can we reduce the customer acquisition cost? Because right at the start, it's founder led. Like for me, with the newsletter, for give you an example, subscribers are very manual, right? I might
Mm,
message a person, I might have a call with you, and then you subscribe. It's very manual. If you gave me money, could I reduce that CAC through paid advertising, for example? So you've really got to think about if that business model scales over time. And I don't know, well, construction feels very direct in person sales, so it's just really difficult. I don't really know what the answer is there.
mm.
Hmm.
Nice. Just made me think about your first idea of like, is there a no code automation opportunity in contact, like with Bubble IO type?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it a few times. One of the most interesting, actually, companies, I think what is really valuable about low code or Bubble.io. So Bubble.io is a really flexible platform. Even if I don't know if you are familiar with it, is, but you can build really complex things. So one of my last apps was building basically a copycat to Airbnb, but it was slightly different. It was catering for tradies who wanted to travel around Australia. But we built all these API connections. So it's very complex. And what's really valuable about this is you can have a really strong learning process between your sales team and your customer support team and your development process. So that app that we built, I think, was quoted by a software development team to take 6 to 8 months at a cost of 300 to 500K. And we delivered it in 6 weeks at a cost of about 40 to 50 grand. So
Oh.
it's a massive difference, and you can build a lot faster. What that means is when you have a key client who might be bringing on, whatever it is they're bringing on, they almost always have, hey, this is a deal breaker, or this is a requirement for us. And then you say, we'll put it on the roadmap. And they go, that's what everyone says. You're not going to do that.
Mm,
6 months down the track, or 3 months down the track, you go back and you've actually built it because you can build faster. And then you win them on as a key client, and then word of mouth referral. And I've seen a couple of companies do that really effectively, where their technology stack is now a driver of sales. And that's the real benefit of using low code or no code systems. You build
interesting.
faster and start to sell more effectively.
Got it. If I were to ask, you have to write a reflection newsletter of all the articles you've done till date. What
Yeah.
would be some things you would include in that?
I think what I didn't realize was so important. So at the start, it was just startup funding and news. What I didn't realize was so important was how important, one, policy and regulatory requirements influence the industry, to politics. So right now, the Biden versus Trump or Kamala Harris versus Trump, very, very different as to how infrastructure will be funded, such as like the IRA. Um, the CHIPS Act should get funded, nuclear should get funded, but offshore wind, very much up in the air. So there's a lot of risk associated with the infrastructure, which I didn't realize. And it's been really interesting because I see two things which I found interesting. One is global power, or like that global politics of like China versus US, and then supply chains really influences construction. And then the second one that's really cool is space construction. Seems like a lot more people are talking about it. NASA's doing a lot of funding, and then you start to see China also do funding, or the EU do funding. And it's really interesting to see how um, if I was to do a master's, for example, I was just thinking this the other day, I was like, oh, it would be actually probably in global politics, not in construction,
Mm,
because global politics is actually what's influencing the construction environment. And there's this conflation of military tech and construction tech as it relates to space construction. So you're really starting to see, and it'll be interesting to see if there will be the same restrictions that we saw with semiconductor manufacturing starting to come towards construction technology in 5 to 10 years, where it's like, hey, we've got these autonomous robots to build, out of space, or like maybe retrofit or whatever. Is that going to be a critical technology that we now can't sell um, in another region? And those are really interesting things to think about. And it's really interesting seeing how startups in China versus startups in US solve problems really differently, because in the US it's like, hey, we got a problem, why did that problem happen, why did that delay happen? In China it's like, we need to build really, really fast. It's not why did that problem happen, it's like, we have to overcome this problem as quickly as possible, which means actually those startups from China don't get to the US, and US don't get to China, because they're solving
mm.
really different pain points. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I like the perspective of like how like the macro policy is also affecting like the whole like strategic and planning.
Hmm.
Have you seen like bubbles where you've seen more innovation in contact geography wise?
Yeah, I mean, it just really depends on the makeup of infrastructure in a region. So the EU has all of its building stocks already built out pretty much, and everything's retrofits to decarbonize. So you see really great solutions relating to that. I think it's EcoWorks, which is figuring out how to retrofit a large apartment building. And then on the other side, you have India, where everyone is building new construction, completely different problem set. And you get completely different solutions. Like Inframarket's just such an interesting solution of, hey, that only works in maybe India or somewhat similar. You see some in South America of, we can't trust all the small distributors. We need someone to guarantee quality and then distribution as well. But that doesn't work in EU or US, where quality requirements filter down all the way to the bottom. So it's really interesting to see how, developing nation versus developed nation, speed of construction, aging population, all of these macroeconomic factors, as you mentioned, really affect the way that you build. And it's really interesting also from a startup perspective of really choosing the sector that you actually sell to is important, because I want to choose, for example, data centers or renewable energy or anything sustainability related, because I know those are growing sectors for a significant period of time. And if I sell to one contractor, they might be paying me 10,000 today, but depending on my pricing strategy, they might pay me 20,000 in 2 to 3 years as they grow effectively. So being really selective there is valuable. Whereas in other industries, I don't know if that need or that thinking is as prevalent.
Got it. Any thoughts on Middle East and their growth in technology?
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting. Actually, I sat through a presentation on MENA region a while ago now, but it is really interesting because, yeah, Saudi Arabia is poised to become one of the biggest construction markets in the world in the very near future, just given the extent of what they're building. And what we are seeing is that there is a number of regulatory changes to really spur and support what they are building. It is, I think in some ways, I can't speak to it specifically. It is obviously going to be very difficult to build in some ways of entering the country, understanding the local regulatory requirements. And because it is so difficult to build each of these regions, it is really valuable to have local expertise of some partner who can help you get into that country. But yeah, it is a Saudi Arabia is, I think it's poised to become the biggest construction market or something like that. I posted about it a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Got it. Any patterns you have identified on construction startups that failed?
What do you mean? Like just like patterns or like ways they go to market or?
Yeah, like why it didn't work out?
Yeah, so that's actually interesting. One of the next articles, hopefully, will be about that.
Oh, nice.
So it's really thinking about, what are the base level, foundation levels of what a team needs, and then what are the value drivers that help with adoption, and then how do we think about project fit? Yeah, just still thinking through with the person who's writing that article of what that really looks like because it's difficult to understand. But I think something that I have felt really is really important within the construction industry is just having a person from construction working as part of the founding team or one of the first hires because there's two reasons for it. One is it's really things don't always make sense from the outside. And often, if you look at it from the outside, you can look at it and go, yeah, this is actually the process you should follow. And you can come in and tell people that, but people won't follow it and they'll annoy you and then you won't get adoption. The second thing is people tend to only trust people who have also been in construction. It's a really trust based and relationship based industry. So, unless I know that you've walked on a site, even if you build the greatest solution, um, you're probably not going to get adoption because we are in some ways insular and go, hey, like if I don't know you, I don't know you. And I think if you've ever seen Matt Graves's memes on LinkedIn, he has some great memes of even when you're a green civil engineer, like man, as me as a civil engineer, when I walk on a site, like the first time, especially when I started, they'll just look at you and go, I'm not going to listen to you. You could tell someone to do something and they will just like turn around and do whatever the hell they want. Cause they're going, hey, like I've been on a construction site for 10 years. This guy's like, 1 month out of uni. Why would I listen to you? Which honestly, in so many ways is fair enough. Um, and the way you build versus the way you learn is very different. But it's a really important statement to say like people don't trust you unless you've proven that you have experience, you have understanding, you're going to work with them, you're going to learn with them, and you're not going to disappear when things get hard.
Nice. Have you felt any like talent issues in our industry where like let's say for a person who upgrades themselves to learn software development, the firm might not pay that much and they might find better opportunities in big big tech firms?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard thing because I think across industries, people are naturally innovative because they want to do things better. People want to do things better and they don't want to do work that they don't want to do. And it can be hard, especially if you're technology leaning or technology feels like the answer to that problem in many ways. There aren't many tech roles around there. And that is really difficult because construction firms tend to have very set career paths. And when you step out of the bounds of those career paths, you need a supportive manager or you need to be creative in it of yourself to figure out what that looks like. And I think that's really hard. So, for example, I'm a pavements and aviation engineer who also is interested in technology. What does that look like from a career perspective? Really, really unclear and really, really difficult to understand. And I can see, from other people who have been on similar journeys, you've seen them like start their own independent consulting practices or leave or join a startup. Or sometimes, like for me now, I'm in an innovation team. It's really hard because that career pathway isn't defined and we haven't seen enough people follow those steps to go, oh, I'm going to follow this person. You got to figure it out for yourself. So that's really difficult. And especially if you upgrade as a software developer, you're going to earn more in big tech. Like they pay crazy amounts. So a lot of people who do stay come from the passion. And if
Mm,
they're coming from the passion, you need to give them the learning opportunities or like the intellectual stimulation to support that. And if there aren't many people around, it's really hard to foster that culture.
yeah, you hit all the points. Like it's If the right incentives and the environment is there, then they'll stay for sure.
Mm.
I
Mm.
see. Uh, you initially mentioned about like innovation ROI. So for, let's say, a agency who does AC automation and innovation consulting, how do they like value prop to a construction firm? Because then they're like, okay, we don't have extra money and we want to see ROI, but to see ROI they have to implement and work. It's a like uh,
It's really really hard. I can't speak to it just because I often wonder that myself. Because when you it really comes down to how is that sale driven. And I think a good way or a good example is just like any kind of basic consulting services. So you start solving one problem and then you grow and expand it to create an entire innovation program. One great way is just say you want to build an asset management program for an infrastructure authority or an infrastructure provider. You first say, hey, like we'll go out and we'll look at all your infrastructure and give it a rating. And then you give it a rating and it's like, hey, these are bad. We'll fix it for you as well. And then
mm,
they're like, hey, you've done that for us. We trust you. All right, now you fix this. Hey, like we should probably do this on a yearly basis. Oh, let's build this into an entire program. Let's create a map base and start tracking all your infrastructure assets and rating it on a map. Same thing with innovation. Hey, I have a problem. Can you solve it? All right, I'll come in, I'll solve it. Hey, I've solved that problem, but there's actually a bigger problem. And they're going, hey, well, I trust you and you solved that one so effectively. We'll give you a bigger scope of work and a bigger pie. Oh, this is the ROI on this one. It's just any consulting, you start with something small, a linchpin, maybe a loss leader, and you just build off the top of that. And then as you do that more and more, you're going to understand who your target customer profile is, but also what your internal capabilities of are. So I know that this kind of organization or like this mid-market organization has this problems, and I can go up to them and say, hey, I solved it for these last three companies. Can I solve it for you? But I think you'd have to just go from it from any kind of consulting.
I like the way you compared, because so all the agency needs is like, what is one small problem that could get you into the doors of that firm, and then you start building relationship and then upsell your services rather than,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Like with the way I got like the good example is the way I got the that education program that I was doing for, or like the education work that I was doing for Bubble, or like the agency that was delivering Bubble was I went in to help them with I think video content creation because they had a marketing problem, and then the problem turned out was they can't get enough Bubble developers, and the way that they
Mm,
wanted to get more Bubble developers is by giving free education content. And I was like, why don't we just build a course of like on how to use APIs? Well, if we do that, then we upskill and then everyone goes, hey, oh, these guys know what they're talking about. I want to work for them. Can we get more people through that? And then, oh, like we have this boot camp. Why don't we give more content? And why don't we increase our own supply? So it started from this really small thing. And then after like 2 months of doing that small one, it's like, hey, this is the bigger problem and this is a bigger project, but I think it will solve what you need. And then you have those strategy calls, or after a call, you'll send a memo and be like, hey, this is what I think it looks like. This is what I think it could be. This is my proposal. And they'll say yes, yes, yes. Oh, no, no, no. And you just slowly increase the scope of what you're doing for them.
nice.
And your ultimate aim is to become like a retainer contract. So like that's
Correct.
what a lot of those agencies try to do.
Yeah. It's it made me think when you were mentioning about the course. What is one course you would like to teach for sure, and that would benefit 18-year-old Bhragan?
um, I think actually, so something we did, or something I learned recently was someone was delivering some design thinking workshops, which is just a process of like, how do you explore a problem deeply? And then how do you work together in groups to work independently, but then to come together and share what the possible solutions are and get to the best place and build a prototype and then go to the MVP and then scale it. So it really just showed that entrepreneurship, or that the process of idea creation and delivery is actually a process. And there are steps that you can follow and learn. And everything until that point, I've just been trying to figure out or make up on your own, as I'm sure you would have felt the same. You have no idea what you're doing. But going through that workshop and seeing it, I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I didn't know that it makes sense that people have written down what really works and how it works. And if I was 18 and someone gave me a design thinking workshop, at the time I wouldn't understand it. But I think when I get into the workforce, when I start learning, when I start doing things, I'd be like, wow, that was actually really important.
Nice. Yeah, I read a really interesting book from Stanford Design School, and they're like, how can you adopt this design thinking principles for your life? So how do you prototype
Mm,
your life and make
interesting.
decisions? Yeah. And
Interesting.
yeah, in engineering, like we we have a different approach of problem solving, and designers have a different approach of problem solving. And I think there is a uh, learning from each other's approaches and have a good framework.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think even as a designer, you could apply design thinking of going, hey, what does my client actually need? Because very often, sometimes, you'll build the wrong thing because there's a communication mismatch, and then it becomes a lot of stress to deliver on time.
All right, I want to do a rapid fire round. So you'll have
Okay,
20 seconds to answer and like keep it very brief. All right.
okay.
Who's your role model?
Who is my role model? Immediately came. I was thinking of Naval, who was the tech entrepreneur. I definitely read a lot of his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, Naval Ravikant is amazing.
Mm.
Your favorite book?
My favorite book, I really like Red Rising by Pierce Brown, sci-fi book.
I say. Your favorite engineering book?
Sorry, say that again. It just cut out slightly.
Yeah. Your favorite engineering work, a piece of work, a
Like
building,
like civil
transportation.
engineering.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was on site for a level crossing removal. So we had to build an entire level crossing removal in like 4 week occupation. So everything closed. Everything happened so fast. The amount of money in that project, the delivery was, yeah, pretty hectic, but it was a lot of fun.
I say. Mentor you want to give shout out to?
A mentor I want to give a shout out to, it would be Simon Gore. He was my first ever mentor, and he, yeah, made me believe in myself a lot more. And was like, oh, like you should try these things. You have this capability, like give it a crack. So that was definitely, without him, I wouldn't be here.
I say. Your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? I really like Inception.
Yeah. Favorite restaurant?
Favorite restaurant? I'm a big fan of, in Melbourne, there's one called Leonard's House of Love, which is just like this really like quirky burger joint. Really good burgers.
I say. A city which is in your travel bucket list?
Oh, I want to go to Argentina and probably Buenos Aires. Yeah, South America's been on the cards for a while.
A book which made a big impact in your life?
I was gonna say The Alchemist, but I feel like that's just such a stereotype, especially now that I said Naval at the start.
uh, three words your friend would describe you?
Ah, I'd say maybe curious, hopefully thoughtful, and caring.
I see. Anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you would like to end on that note?
Nothing really comes to mind. I mean, I've just really enjoyed chatting. It's pretty nice to do it this way, where it was just like a lot more laid back of just let's have a chat and see how it goes. So that was really fun. So thanks for having me on. It was really fun.
Likewise, you shared some amazing insights, and like again, like I love the newsletter content you're putting
Thank
out,
you.
and um, I'm looking forward. I saw you just emailed a new edition, like so it's on my list to read. So
Thank you.
thanks for being on my show. Hope to collaborate in some form in